swung around to making each employee far more important than he had been back when Grandpa was building it up, where you could get a man for $1,200 a year. It wasn't an important cost in the business. And by the time we left, you could, if you want an able-bodied man, you had to pay $25,000, and then you got a guy who wasn't very swift upstairs, you know, but very educated. And so, things, you know, for many, many years, they got $5 for an appliance. At that time, the postage was 2 cents, first-class letter. At the end, we're getting $50 for an appliance, and postage is 32 cents, not 20. And the various costs didn't stay in the same juxtaposition with each other over the years. Certain things became much more important.
When did Bud come in?
Very young. I don't know. Bud and Isabel, I could look it up. Well, they were married at the age of 19, I think. Both of them were 18 or 19. And they gave him the little yellow house as a wedding present, Grandpa did.
So Grandma Wright must have died by then.
It was about the same time. And that house became available, and Grandpa bought out to Lawrence and Pete's interest, and so the Gladys had a third of it by inheritance, and they just gave it to Bud and Isabel's wedding present.
Built a
They lived
fence.
there all their lives.
Built the fence. Didn't Grandpa rebuilt the fence around the house before?
Well, I don't know if...
Am I in your
the
way,
rights-
Carolyn?
No, I'm gonna walk the dog,
Oh.
but I'm looking for my shoes.
I don't know if the Wrights had that fence there earlier, or if it was initiated by Craig and Harold, I don't know. I suspect it was a restoration of how it had been originally.
Yeah, I think I saw a picture of the house, some photograph from 1870 or 1880, and that fence is still in, look just like it.
There may have been a time when it was gone, and then Harold and Bud rebuilt it.
Right.
Could be.
So when did they do the Buddy Brooks talcum powder?
Oh, I would say from about 1935 until 1955. Quite a long time. But it was never significant. They tried vitamin pills for a while too.
I remember that. I mean, I remember hearing about it, or maybe I was aware just at the end.
Well, that was one of Bud's ideas. Theoretically, it might have been quite profitable because the margin is very big, and you were dealing with an old folks list there. You were mailing to them anyway, so you put a package insert for something else. That was the idea.
Sure.
You're paying the postage anyway. But it didn't amount to much, but it never got much support from HC. Now, it was a very peculiar fiefdom down there. Bud couldn't buy a postage stamp without Grandpa's permission. And although his title was president of the place, you really had to inveight with Grandpa to get anything. And then Grandpa would turn around and cut your legs off afterwards. He'd have second thoughts about it, you know. Like you say, we need some new typewriters around here. Well, all right, get a couple of typewriters, and then you shop around and you have 6 typewriters coming in, and the bill would come or something, and oh, no, and then they'd send them back, you know.
Oh, jeez.
This was what it was like working with Grandpa. Yeah, I remember before I went down there to work, he asked me one time to rearrange the office insurance policies on products liability and fire and all of insurance, and they had it with the Dutch Roberts Agency, which was then become Sullivan, and which had previously been Simon's. Patsy's father had it for years. That's why they had been there all that time.
Sure.
And the workman's compensation was in that too. And anyway, now I had a great long parlay with Tom Sullivan about it, and we finally agreed on what we thought was practical, and I brought it back to Grandpa, and all he had to do was pay the bill and ratify the thing, but no, he wanted it all explained to him again. You know, now that's, whoever you're doing business with will at this point throw up his hands and say, well, it isn't worth doing business with people like that. But this is what the way Grandpa became at the end. It was very hard. And it was for a long time too, before he finally let go, and people were putting up with that stuff. Anybody who, he couldn't work with him. I mean, anybody he tried to get to work with him, it didn't work very well.
Now, what Clive Reed, he was there for.
Clyde.
Clyde,
Mhm.
yeah, he was there for quite a while, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. Eventually, he got a job with Eaton's, and I think they sent him out to Iowa. And he'd come back and visit once in a while. Very, very pleasant guy. He lived next to Bud there
Oh,
on
okay,
High Street.
all right.
And I guess he was Charlie's age.
Virginia, they're gonna show the
Now,
road.
he and George palled around.
Or
so,
George, yeah, they were.
Yeah,
Clyde was a really nice guy, good man, and I'm happy that he eventually got a very good job and got promoted and everything in Eaton's and lived happily ever after. Last time I saw him, I was so startled. He had gray hair.
he got older, huh?
Yeah, yeah.
So how many,
He'd come by and visit Harry.
what relatives worked there? I mean, there's Grandpa and Lou, and Tom and Chuck both worked there from time to time, didn't they?
Oh, yes, yes. At the same time Bud did.
For fitters,
When they
as
started.
fitters, yeah.
You know, it's ironic is that the relationship between Grandpa and the Wright family. Well, of course, Lawrence Wright was the 45 years the manager in England, and George Wright was 40 years or something correspondent there at the office. But what's ironic is that when Grandpa wanted to marry Gladys, the Brookses weren't good enough for the Wrights, and they stalled him off for 2 or 3 years before they let him marry Gladys. And he ended up not only employing her brothers, but also her mother's sister. Grandpa was paying for the apartment for Aunt Carrie for years upstairs over one of the stores downtown. He was paying for Mrs. Day, who was Grandma Wright's housekeeper for many years. And I mean, he ended up supporting the whole Wright family, which is kind of a sweet little story. But he didn't have any pension for Uncle Pete, which was a terribly traumatic thing. In 1950, I believe it was, that Pete retired.
Well, there was no Social Security.
Yeah, there was.
Well, but not as great a function of your cost of living as it is now.
True. Well, Carrie Bell had a teacher's pension. And they went out to live in Arizona, in the trailer, and a little dog, a wire-haired terrier. And Lord, it was, I don't know, 1 year or something later, Pete died. Carrie Bell came back. And eventually she moved down to Anderson, Indiana, lived on for many, many years. She was quite blind at the end. She had your mother and my mother down there.
Oh.
Shortly before she died, she had them come down and she gave them all the right silver.
Oh, very
This
nice.
was George's family, and
Oh,
each
very
girls
nice.
to have this and so on. Yeah. And they had a nice day down there, Anderson, Indiana, one day. Went down there for lunch with Carrie Bell.
But it was, Pete and Carrie Bell had no kids.
Right.
And
Lawrence,
Lawrence had Ben.
he also had Connie, who was unacknowledged daughter.
Not Connie, was it Connie?
No,
I had lunch with her.
yeah, I met her too.
Anyway, and then she died, about the same time Ben did.
Tragic, very young. She died at the age of 40 or something.
Yeah, it was, yeah. And,
Now Lawrence
Lawrence.
went over there way back, 1913 or something. And Grandpa hired Mr. Bont in Amsterdam.
Grandpa hired him.
Yes, Grandpa hired him in 1910 or 11 to start office in Amsterdam to work out of London.
Okay.
And Lawrence Wright ran London and Amsterdam and Buenos Aires. Because for many years, anything that came from a foreign country to Marshall was referred to London. The reason given was that the shipping rates were lower out of London, what being a port city, than the landlocked Marshall, Michigan, where you had to have railway express, and then you had to have a customs broker in the big city and stuff and everything.
Sure.
To get something exported was a pain. But I think just as much of the reason was Grant didn't want to be bothered with that chicken feed and that little foreign stuff with all the difficulties that was involved. We'll just give it up to London business and let them have the hassle, you know.
I got, and that stuff I got from you, I got a nice, well, there was a note all about the fellow that was going down to run the Buenos Aires office. And he'd worked in all the different parts of it was a letter from Lawrence back to Grandpa, I think.
Yeah.
And they got him all set, all trained, everything, and sent him off with 500 pounds. And then there's a nice picture from the Buenos Aires office too, and it could be taken in Marshall. You know, two guys all dressed in the white smocks and the gals there and so forth. There were 6 of them or something. So.
When I started at Brooks Appliance, I got a letter from the guy who was still there. His name was, escapes me. But he was the same guy, had been there all along since 1935. And he was sorry to bother me, but he wondered, he says, we just cannot get any little rubber date stamps, daters, that with the wheels that turn. You can change the day and keep the cards
The
on.
last one he had expired 1958 or something, right? Yeah.
So he says, I'd be happy to remit. You just pick me up a half a dozen and send them down here a certain way so there's no duty, you know, as a gift or something. And I did as I was told, and back came his check for $10.85 on the Bank of America, San Francisco. You know, nobody in Buenos Aires kept any money in Buenos Aires. And then one thing led to another. We exchanged a few more letters, and I asked him for samples of his literature and the system that he was using, and how about the cards and so on. And he sent me the customer record card. It's identical in every way to the one we were using in Marshall. It never changed. And the same in London. They were using identical system of customer cards, and some of the same cushion numbers meant the same thing.
And it had all been designed by Grandpa in 1908.
Yeah. Nobody ever changed it. It's almost scary. If you look at the card from 1903, and they were doing it the same way. They were writing down the goods sent, the date, the amount paid.
You know, system that works. It worked.
Yeah. I can't think of his name. He died shortly after that, and the business was run for a while by his son.
I remember there was somebody down there that ordered a bunch of stuff from you, and their bank letter of credit expired 3 days before you went to get paid for it or something.
You're mixed up with that. That was Karachi, Pakistan.
Oh, all right.
And yeah, that's a long story. I wrote finally to David Rockefeller, President of Chase Manhattan Bank, a 4-page diatribe about all the miserable experience we had with the Chase Manhattan Bank, the letter of credit on the Bank of India, and so forth and so on. And I said, we're just going to have to tell our 16,000 customers in the state of New York that we can no longer accept any
payments by the
any instruments written on the Chase Manhattan or money orders or something else, because this was entirely your fault. We was losing $7,000. And I got a phone call back a minute the next day after I mailed that letter. The smoothest talking guy you ever. Oh, Mr. Hughes, I want you to know we're very concerned about your problem. Well, they put me on hold one time, and I complained about that, and the kid said, why don't you get a Watts line, you know? So there were certain surly references to the personnel at the Chase Manhattan Bank in this diatribe that I had sent in there. And the guy said, well, now the fact is we can't, he says, we can't really make them pay, but he says we can, and you should get your money in just a few days. And I did.
You did?
He said, well, he says, you know, we had certain leverage because they wanted to do business with us in other ways, but he says, actually, the letter of credit expired. I said, I suspected that, which is why I was on, you look at my phone bill, you can see that talking to this Chase Manhattan Bank for a week before we let the goods fly, you know. There was another interesting one, we did get the money. There was another interesting one like that, where we had a shipment to Lagos, Nigeria, and the goods were stolen out of the airport.
Sure.
And the freight forwarder said, we're pretty sure that the addressee received the goods, but we can't prove it, and we made a mistake on your air bill. We charged you $2.50 for insurance, so we're going to make good on this. But actually, we don't sell insurance to Lagos, Nigeria, and our clerk made a mistake. So we got our money back on that one too, but the thief beat us out of the goods. He screwed the air freight people.
Well, the office in London had satellite offices in Manchester and Liverpool. But Liverpool was shorter. Manchester lasted for a long time. Didn't it?
Of course, they had two offices in London. They had the works and they had the fitting room building.
Okay.
They owned the works and they rented on a 99-year lease the fitting room building, and they actually got quite a good separation payment on the lease, an unused portion of the lease when they got out of it in 1973. They got quite a bit for that. I went over there, you know, I had proxies or power of attorney for 100% of the stockholders in 1971 when we closed the place up. And so there was a sale of the building, and there was the various niceties of paying Mr. Redford and remitting most of the money back to Marshall in a tax efficient manner. And I think the statute of limitations has expired, and it's all right to admit now that that we got the money out of there on the 21st of December 1971, and on the 31st of December 1971, or the 1st of January 1972, they put in a new regulation that required a report to the IRS of any payment in excess of $10,000. And we knew this was coming when I was over there in October. We were moving heaven and earth to get it done by the end of December, and we did. And we took the check down to Vint Staley down here at the new Marshall Bank of Marshall, and he says, I want you to know that this is the largest deposit to date. Marshall Bank. See, what they did was they sent one check to my mother, and she wrote checks to everybody else. Mother had an account in the
Okay.
Staley's Bank.
All right.
And then Grandpa gave all the money away, so it was a happy time was had by all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was more like, wasn't it like more like 73 or something?
No, maybe one. I know it's 71.
But
Might have been 70.
Cause
No,
I- 'cause
no,
it
no.
was
After
75.
that,
Because I was there in 73. It was
after
something-
that, Redford rented his premises in
Yes.
North One or something,
Yep.
and
That's right.
went on for another 2 years. But this was the sale of the building
Okay.
was 71,
All right.
and that's when we got the big one.
On Pemberton Road.
Yes, yes, it was right across the street from the world headquarters of Lever Brothers. But it was impacted by aerial rights. You couldn't, Dr. Johnson's house was adjacent to it. And at that time, you couldn't build more stories on top of it. And it was very narrow, and it had rotten little stairways. Did you remember the works?
You know, I don't think, I want to say I was there, but I don't think I was. I think I was at the fitting rooms, on
Chancery Lane.
Chancery Lane, but, I don't think.
Well, you know what reminded me of the back stairs at the Brooks Building in Marshall, because there were little narrow wooden
22-inch.
stairs that turned each twice before each flight and she went up, and it's a very narrow building. It was not all that different from the one in Amsterdam, if you remember that.
I do, I was there.
Yeah,
I was
that
there
one
yesterday.
dated to 1690 or something, that place. I asked Mr. Velders if I could have the brass plate out front when he closed. You know, oh no, and he says, I wanted that. I said, forget it. You know, it said Brooks Appliance Company, Londra, New York, whatever on it. I don't know what he said.
Yeah.
London.
Yeah, Buenos Aires, yeah, sure,
Yeah.
sure.
It was a beautiful brass plate on the side of the building.
When did, that was
And it was,
Tom,
and Velders was Mr. Bont's son-in-law.
son-in-law, yeah, and I
So it
stayed,
became the same family there for 7 or 8 years.
no, and I stayed with them, I went to, summer '66, I stayed with them. And the prior contact they'd had, physical contact they'd had with the family was, I don't know if Emmy went there,
Mhm.
you know, in '47, so, yeah.
I remember one conversation with Mr. Velders in 1981 when Carolyn and I stayed at the Sonesta Hotel, which is right around the corner from the Brooks Building in Amsterdam. And we had dinner with Mr. Velders at the Sonesta, I think. And I asked him how he operated, and he told me that he traveled around the different counties of Holland, and he sent letters ahead of time saying that I will be there from this date to this date.
To do fittings?
Yes, at personal fittings, and I said, well, as you speak German, you could probably sell quite a few in Germany as well. And he said, oh, he says, I'm prohibited by the terms of my agreement with Brooks from doing any business in Germany. Well, who knew that, you know? And he said, it was restricted to Holland. I sold him some elastic. It was many years ago. He couldn't get any elastic in Amsterdam. You know, he wasn't running enough
To buy a quantity,
Yeah.
yeah.
And he told me how much he needed, and I gave it to him at just the cost plus the shipping, you know.
Sure.
And it was, you know, $6,000 worth or something. And maybe the money came in about 3 days, you know. Very nice person to deal with.
Sure, sure.
And that lasted him. I remember I talked to him, you know, 6 or 8 years later. He said, oh, I still have some left of that. So,
Now, they had offices here. They had offices in New York, Chicago.
New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and the earliest was Chicago, 1935. Murray Bentley was sent over there as the manager, and he was the son of the funeral director in Marshall.
Okay.
Which was located behind Fred Standard and what was later the Kraft Photo House, and the first house on Grand Street behind Fred Standard was the Bentley Funeral Home.
Okay.
And I think, I'm not sure, but I think it was Bentley Moore. I think that Bernie Moore, furniture guy, was a partner with Bentley.
And it was
later
Kelser.
Kelser. And I think it may have been the same one that later moved over to Mansion Street.
Okay, all right. Well, who is the Mrs. Bentley that Grandpa always had? It was the correspondent and so on?
Yeah, I think that was either the manager's wife or mother
Okay,
over there in
Right.
Chicago. And I closed that office with Harry in 1968.
that was Wilbur Ayers.
Yeah, Wilbur Ayer was the manager then, and Goodwin was the guy, the old man that did fittings in there too. And that was an interesting experience, because Grandpa procrastinated every 3 years or whatever it was when the lease was due again in Chicago. The office wasn't making any money, or was just limping along, and then they try to project what's it going to do in another 3 years, and so the contract with the landlord had had to be renewed within 90 days of the time it expired, or something like that. They had
Sure.
given them 3 months to
Sure.
find a new tenant, you
Sure.
know. And the grandpa dithered and dathered and went way past this time, and finally, well, partly because I was urging him to close the damn place. You can handle those same names from Marshall and
Sure.
make more money off of it. And so finally he agreed to that. And he sent me and Harry over there together to close the office. Well, he failed to tell us that he hadn't told Wilbur.
Oh, jeez. Oh, how sad.
So we marched in there
Oh,
and told Wilbur we were closing the place in 3 weeks' time or something like that. And he had to get a letter out to the customers. You've never seen so many halt and lame old men lined up waiting for personal fittings when they closed that place. It was incredible. All day long. Harry worked over there too, giving fittings all day for 2 or 3 weeks. And